Hello, and welcome to a special post-election edition of Think Twice. I'm currently on the road, so the setting is unfamiliar, but I'm thrilled to have with me today my close friend and JNS colleague, Ruthie Blum, the star of our Israel Undiplomatic podcast. And before we start today's program to talk about the recently concluded American presidential election, I want to remind you, as always, to like this video and podcast, subscribe to JNS, and click on the bell for notifications. Also, you still don't have to wait a full week for more of our content. There is a Jonathan Tobin daily podcast where I share more news and analysis with you about the most significant issues we're facing today. You can find the daily show under Jonathan Tobin Daily on the JNS channel, wherever you get your podcasts. And now to today's program. Ruthie Blum, welcome back to Think Twice.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's been a long time since you and I chatted in this particular fashion.
Yes. Well, let's start off by just talking about what just happened and why so many people in the chattering classes are so shocked and depressed. Trump's victory has certainly sent the people who write at the New York Times and the Washington Post and are on many of the news channels, into a funk. I guess, what does the reaction to the election results tell us about the bubble in which the media operates?
Well, I think the answer lies in your question. It's about that bubble. And I have to say that the Israeli press is no different from the New York Times, et cetera, other than one conservative channel, TV channel in Israel, Channel 14. All the others, they went into mourning. And the answer is, well, it's twofold. In the first place, the polls leading up to this election suggested that it was such a tight race. And that was one thing. And we all thought so. I mean, I thought so. It's true. Some people told me I was wrong, but because, the bettors were betting on Trump, et cetera, et cetera. And I was asked what I predicted. And I said, well, maybe Trump will win by a small margin of electoral college votes, but not by the popular vote. And then it'll be contested and there'll be riots in the streets and all that. I was very pessimistic about a real Trump win, or if so, it would cause no good. In fact, I was proven wrong, just as the New York Times, MSNBC, and all the others, as you call, chattering classes, they are in their little box. They all think alike, and they've been living in an Orwellian universe where everything is topsy-turvy. So this should be no different. And I think what the election results proved is that the American people are just not that radical. It's not just these groups, those groups, blacks, whites, women, whatever. They're Americans, and they are far more sane than the loony left. And I think the same thing goes for Israel, and that is why a majority of Israelis were also really happy with the election results.
Yeah, well, before we get to Israeli reactions to the election, I think it's worth digging down a little deeper into why the expectations were the way they were. I'll just give myself a slight credit. I called the Electoral College vote, assuming that Arizona and Nevada eventually wind up in Trump's column. But what happened, I think, speaks to a lot of the issues that people who care about coverage of Israel also complain about. There was a year of completely biased coverage in the mainstream legacy liberal media. If you look at the New York Times, Washington Post, you turn on MSNBC and CNN, sort of every word about Trump, every word about the contest between him and ultimately Kamala Harris was drenched in sort of anti-Trump, anti-Republican bias. And it was amazing. And it continued even after the results were clear, as they interpreted Trump's clear victory as proof that America, had taken a dark turn. But I think for those of us who care about this coverage, not just for the sake of journalism, but how Israel's covered, how elections are covered, there was sort of bad news and good news. The bad news is that the media is drenched in bias. It is a profession in which not just the lower ranks, but throughout it, they've exchanged journalism for activism. And that's bad news in of itself, but it's also bad news in that there's pretty much nothing you can do about it. These people are, it's baked in. They're not shamed by their bias being exposed. In fact, they just keep doubling down on it. But the good news about this election and the good news about biased media is that it didn't matter. In fact, it was completely irrelevant that a clear majority of the American people were not listening to what CNN and MSNBC told them. They didn't care what the New York Times wrote. They didn't care what the Washington Post wrote. They didn't care that there wasn't a pro-Kamala Harris editorial endorsement in the Washington Post or in the LA Times. They made their own decisions, and they were looking elsewhere for their coverage of the news to podcasts. Joe Rogan was a lot more important than the New York Times. And who would have predicted that a few years ago? But that's really the revolutionary thing about it. And I think it should also impact how we think about coverage of Israel.
Absolutely. I'd also like to add that whether or not it didn't matter because the bulk of the American people was getting news from social media and from podcasts, et cetera, I think that it also had the opposite effect. When you go too far, I think we saw this also when Trump first got elected, after Obama was president. What we saw was when the left goes too far, regular people, not necessarily Republicans or conservatives, regular people say, who are you going to believe? Me or their lying eyes, or what? My lying eyes? They see, first of all, they go to the supermarket and they know how much things cost. Let's start with the economy. But aside from that, they know what's going on in their children's schools. They know what their children are watching on television. They know what their children are coming home from school and telling them what they learned in school that day. They also know, and this is also true, I would say, the media, they're not the only bubble. There's the academics also. The academics are also in lockstep with that. Now, what has happened when they go so far and they get to the point where it really borders on lunacy, normal people push back against that, okay? It's one thing to have an editorial. You can have a newspaper that's totally anti-Trump, but start calling him Hitler and start, taking him to court for every little thing, or start accusing him of things that he's not guilty of and not tackling the actual things that maybe a regular person would agree with. It goes off into la-la land, and I think normal people are just not that stupid. And they don't like it. They don't like being told those extremist, crazy things.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of truth in that. And I think in the incredulity of, on the left about Trump's ability to win this election, to win it in a fashion in which truly surprised them, winning the popular vote, not just the Electoral College, not some sleight of hand way of winning, is that they've always overplayed their hand in denouncing him. Everybody knows he says a lot of things that, and he exaggerates. But the point is, as with the January 6th issue, they're still harping on that. And, obviously it was a disgrace, the Capitol riot. But when they tried to turn that into a full-blown insurrection and, blow it into a conspiracy that encompassed not merely Trump, not merely the people who actually broke into the Capitol, but basically everybody who questioned the election results in a COVID year where there was chaos, where there was censorship of the media and of the news that tilted things towards Biden, whether the election was stolen or not. There were elements of it that weren't fair and were certainly chaotic. People understood this. And it made them less trustful of the media, less trustful of the people telling them what to do. And instead of owning this, instead of owning the fact that the economy wasn't working for most ordinary people, There's still, if you looked at the post-election coverage on the networks and on CNN and MSNBC, you still heard people arguing, why are they complaining about the economy? The stock market is up. This indication is up. And it's sort of like, just look at the price of eggs. The price of eggs is up. That's what people notice. If eggs are $7 a dozen, way more than they used to cost, that really impresses it upon people. And they consider that more important. And instead, they're blaming the country for making a choice and saying, well, maybe you're not good enough for us.
Well, that's the trouble with elitists, okay? Many of the elite, they're not all big rich people. Many are affluent. But the point about them is they don't actually connect to a normal person who has a budget for things like food, okay? The people I know who talk in the way that you're talking, suggesting, work at the New York Times, they may say, well, I can't go to the Bahamas this year on vacation. They're not counting the price of eggs, believe me. Okay, so that's one thing. But the other huge hypocrisy is that January 6th was a contained riot. It happened and it ended. For the past year, we have been seeing nonstop riots all over the United States. By the way, we saw that also during COVID and the Black Lives Matter riots. So forget about those for a minute, because they also were out of hand. But since the October 7th massacre in Israel, we have seen every campus, practically every campus, taken over by these Tentifada activists and real riots. And this is when they should be in school, because their mommies and daddies were spending a fortune to send them there. How come nobody mentioned those riots? You're harping on January 6th when riots are happening right in front of you from the other side. It's inexcusable.
Yeah, and I think there was, it's sort of very myopic because, yes, on the one hand, they're ignoring the real violence, the violence in the city, the fact that crime has made people feel unsafe to go into cities, and feeling that the country is out of control, feeling the border is out of control. And instead, they turn these issues around, feeling that their schools are out of control. The elites have, turned it around and saying, well, anybody who notices this is a racist. They're sexist. If you didn't vote for Kamala Harris, you were a misogynist. Always blaming the voters for, noticing what's going on, for having the right to have their own judgment, and instead just saying, well, it's the same evil America. It's the same idea of the 1619 Project about America being an irredeemably racist country. And they wonder why people don't like that. They don't like being called racist because they aren't racist. And that is, when I wrote this week just before the election saying that however it came out, it's clear that we're divided. We've had a realignment in this country as the Republicans became the party of the working class, which had been abandoned by the Democrats, who always were the party of the working people, at least claimed to be. Instead, they're the party of the credentialed elites. They're the party of the people who read the New York Times and who, are not affected by the economy in the same way. They're not affected by the fentanyl epidemic, of opioid addiction. Their families have not been touched by it as much as working class people. And instead, what they get is, well, the smart people should rule the country. The dumb people should do what they're told. And, and they say they're doing this in the name of democracy. And that has created this, not only this backlash, which, is labeled as dark and angry, but it's created a political realignment. A lot of the people that, we used to be friends with, among conservatives and Republicans, they don't like their party anymore because it isn't the party of the elites. It isn't the party of strictly laissez-faire economics. The George W. Bush administration. It's a party which is more common good conservatism rather than sort of libertarian conservatism. and they don't like it. They turned on it. But like so many, despite the fact that they get all this coverage in the media, the never Trumpers, they're only, Trump got 94% of the Republican vote. So I guess it was all kind of a scam.
Well, it was definitely a scam. I mean, we can say that in retrospect. I didn't know that ahead of time. I told you, I was nervous. I didn't expect this result. However, I do know one thing, and I think though I haven't lived in America for decades, I can say that what I know about America in my gut and from visiting is that Americans are not basically racist, sexist, misogynist, all of those things. It's just on the contrary. And I remember that when Obama became president, one of the things that when he was inaugurated and Oprah Winfrey was weeping tears of joy. And I remember watching that on television in Israel and thinking, I wish I would like to cry tears of joy too, because this is a very moving moment, but I can't do it because they're so radical. And the trouble is that Obama, what he did, rather than fix this, say, you see, we're not a racist country. We voted for a black president. Anyway, we're just not. He did the opposite. He created greater racial strife. This was a purposeful move. Anything that can divide American society. It was really kind of the Saul Alinsky playbook. You undermine America from within. And the thing is that Americans are actually very liberal. They're very open. But that doesn't mean that they think that boys are girls, girls are boys, everything is upside down. No, they don't think that. But that doesn't mean that they hate gay people or they hate black people no, they don't. And what's more, I have to tell you, if I were black or Hispanic or any other, I'm a woman, so I could say that from that sort of what you call group, is that I would be extremely offended. What do you mean I'm a Latino? I've become an American. I'm an American citizen. I worked to become an American citizen, and you're treating me like some kind of second class, underprivileged. No, that's not a good message that you're telling people who want to be part of a beautiful society, and they are. And, then what you're saying is, no, you're part of an interest group, and that's all you are. You're Latino, or you're black, or you're a black man. Obama gave a speech to a bunch of black men and said to them that if they don't vote for Kamala, it's a sign that they're misogynist. Well, they did not like that, and rightly so that they didn't like it. Like, who is Obama to tell them what they feel about women, and to tell them how they should vote? What? You're so condescending. What? I'm just a black guy, who didn't go to Harvard, and therefore you're going to tell me what I need to know. It's no wonder this group of people was rejected in this election. No wonder.
I think many people, not merely, on the left, but even some on the right, underestimated the importance of what they might have dismissed as a sort of culture war issue, which is the trans madness and all of its associated woke ideology. The one brilliant thing that the Trump campaign did was to hone in on it. And you really got that. And they targeted the audience that they thought that would be most receptive. Certainly if you lived in a swing state or close to one, in a market which reaches a swing state, and you were watching, a baseball or a football game, the commercials, which are the only things that people actually watch that have commercials in them, because otherwise they DVR things and they fast forward through the commercials, or they just watch streaming platforms where there are no commercials. But if you watched a NFL game, or you're watching the Major League Baseball playoffs, there was this one ad which quoted Kamala Harris about wanting to pay for the gender transition surgeries of people who are imprisoned, illegal aliens who are imprisoned. And so the tax money should go towards these operations, which was kind of crazy and kind of struck most people as an aberrant thing. And that was the commercial in which they invested their most amount of money. And it ended with this idea, Kamala's for they, them, President Trump is for you. He's for us. And, this is dismissed as sort of anti-gay, anti-trans, homophobic, transphobic, racist. But instead, it just reminded Americans of, that one side of the political equation had gone off the rails and had embraced these woke, toxic ideologies that were leading to crazy things like asking them to pay for transition surgeries for illegal aliens who had been imprisoned. And that convinced, that was a very effective ad. The other side is still mad about it, but it goes to the point that these issues, which are dismissed as culture war issues, actually go straight to the most important things about any election, about the choices that people, wherever they are going to be making about their society, about this war on Western civilization. And it turns out that was, and I think in some ways became a tipping point.
Well, absolutely. And it reminded me, when you're talking about this, the funding of the trans surgeries. Funding is a very important thing in any country, and in democracies in particular, where you're debating about, where you have a say, okay, what we should fund and what we shouldn't fund, and that's partly what you're voting on. This has always been the case with the left, where they accuse you of being, for example, you're supposed to fund, the arts, including if it's pedophilia, photographs of pedophiles and stuff like that. Now, then they say, well, if you don't want to fund it, then that means you don't want taxpayer dollars to fund this exhibit. You're against freedom of speech. No. Go ahead. You want to put on an exhibit like that? I find it vile. Go ahead. I'm not paying for it. The same thing with the trans surgeries. It's not, I don't care. You want to have surgery. I may not want my child to, or I would agree with it, but to fund it when I'm worried about my health care in general, when I have a family member with cancer who can't afford the treatments, and I'm going to pay for somebody who is, transgender and needs surgery, again, especially if he's in jail, and an illegal alien. But even if he's not in jail, even if he's not illegal, the point is, you people do whatever you want. Why do I have to pay for it? And there is where they're lying, because what they do is accuse you of being anti-trans, anti-freedom of speech, anti. And I'll tell you something, there is the sages, the Jewish sages have an expression, have a saying, posel bemumo posel. And that's like saying it takes one to know one. That's a rough translation, but really what it means is what they're accusing you of is exactly what they're guilty of. And
there was a lot of projection in this election, and especially about democracy and freedom of speech and freedom. The party that had actually tried to jail their leading opponent and bankrupt him through lawfare, and who had colluded with big tech to try to censor, dissenting views, claimed to be the party of democracy and the party of freedom.
Exactly. And, it's true. The same thing, very similar things are happening in Israel. And you'd think that Israel could afford it a lot less, which it can't, because, we're being attacked on 7 fronts militarily, which America is not. America is actually a target of anti-Western forces, but Israel actually is so small and right in the Middle East and right on the, in the crosshairs. Okay, so we're more on the front lines. And in spite of that, the left in Israel is still does exactly that same thing, uses lawfare to get rid of the candidate they can't get rid of at the ballot box, uses also twists. They're calling anti-democracy what is actually democracy. It's a constant overturning, inversion of, and it makes moral clarity. It's funny, it actually sharpens the moral clarity of normal people.
Yeah, because they can smell a rat.
Exactly.
They understand what's going on in a way that the supposedly most educated people don't. Now, speaking of the most educated people, one of the sort of interesting sidebars, certainly for us at JNS as we cover the Jewish world, is the question of, well, what did the Jews do during this election? What was the Jewish vote? There have been some dueling exit polls, as I anticipated. One from NBC and published by CNN showed that 79% of the Jews nationwide voted for Kamala Harris, only 21% for Donald Trump. There was another Fox News exit poll that showed a lesser amount for Harris, in the 60s, 64% for Harris, but still winning, the overwhelming support. But then there were other polls that showed that the Jews in New York were more evenly split. I guess my question for you as an observer of the Jewish world, should we really care that much about these exit polls? And what do you think they're telling us?
Well, first of all, I was going to ask you why we even rely on polls anymore, given the last polls. But also, this has been going on for a while now where these polls have been completely wrong. So I wonder why we bother with polls at all. But that's a separate issue. But I need to ask you before I answer that question, how do we define who is a Jew in this context? It's one thing to define who is a Jew. First of all, you could say a Jew is whoever identifies as a Jew, right? I mean, which is different from I identify as a man, a woman, a dog, a cat. But I mean, there are people who call themselves Jews. Now, they might not be Jewish in the Jewish law sense of the word, but that doesn't matter when you're talking about an electorate, because you're saying, how does somebody feel? Does he feel Jewish? Does he feel that he's connected to the Jewish people? And I don't know how you count that. And that is why it's easier in America to determine based on pockets of Jewish communities, especially if they're Orthodox. We do know that the bulk of the Orthodox community voted for Trump. That we know.
Yeah, just look at the totals in Rockland County, New York, which is, has large, ultra Orthodox pockets of votes, and is significant, and also parts of northern New Jersey as well.
Right. Now, we know if you're talking about places like, again, Jews are, there's in New York and California and then Brooklyn, right? And if you're talking about, Manhattan, Upper West Side of Manhattan type of Jews, and they care about being Jews and they care about Israel and they go to, conservative or reform synagogues and stuff. So they're definitely Jews electorally and also, emotionally. And most of those, I think, voted for Harris. Now, I think some of those, the difference this time, because of the October 7th massacre, is some of those just didn't vote, which is unlike Jews usually vote. But I happen to know, not just anecdotally, but also from articles written by certain prominent Jewish figures who said that, Trump is a danger to democracy, et cetera. Now, so does the Jewish vote matter? Well, I don't think it matters in numbers so much, but it matters when you're trying to understand a sociological phenomenon, especially where Israel is concerned or people's connection to Israel. It's important in that sense, particularly after the October 7th massacre, because of the war that's going on and because Iran says it wants to and intends to wipe Israel off the map, and where it's said that all along, but now it's kind of proving it or, attempting it physically. So then you could say, well, it matters. I want to know what Jews are thinking about this also because, more importantly, because the October 7th massacre unleashed levels of anti-Semitism in the United States that haven't been seen in its history. Even when anti-Semitism was in America, it was much more quiet. It was quiet. You couldn't get into this country club or that country or that college. It's not that there was no anti-Semitism, but this is raging, open anti-Semitism. And certainly since the Holocaust, there hasn't been this kind of thing. And it's just out there. So you wonder, what are American Jews thinking while they're the target of this anti-Semitism? Because it's enough for them just to be Jews to be accused of genocide in Gaza. This could be a Jew who never even got on a plane, was never even in the Middle East, let alone committing genocide in Gaza, which of course Israel is not doing anyway. So it's mysterious. I think it's important to study it historically.
Yeah, I think that's true. Now, when we speak of these polls, let's understand, especially when you're talking about a national poll, and where they're saying that 2% of the sample is identifying as Jewish, whether they are or not, we can debate that or wonder about that. But when you're only talking about 2% of a sample, which is itself not, tens of thousands of people, but in fact, a small sample of maybe 1,000, maybe 2,000 people, the margin of error is very large. So it could be, 5 or 10 points in each direction. And so they're not reliable. But what is interesting about it to me is that what it's telling about this community and its connections with Israel, its worries, what do they care the most about? Even when in a year when, many members of their families and quite frankly, likely their children whom they sent to college have been the ones experiencing anti-Semitism. And yet in the end, their partisan ties matter more, in part because politics plays the role that religion used to play in most people's lives in America, as well as, and that counts for the Jews too. But, I would argue that if the vast majority of Jews are sticking with the Democrats, it's because the Democrats are the party that represents their class interests. I spoke before about the Democrats becoming the party of the credentialed elites, while the Republicans became the working class. And that involved a fair number of people sort of switching sides in this country, whether they're living in the suburbs and used to be sort of country club Republicans, or whether they're working people, work with their hands and used to vote, for the Democrats because they assumed the Republicans were the party of Wall Street. But now they vote for the Republicans because they perceive Trump and his Republican Party as defending their interests. Well, the Jews haven't moved at all because, they are disproportionately among the most educated Americans. Not all, and, there are working class Jews, but the vast majority of American Jews are among the credentialed elites. They are college educated, and that's one of the key indicators of support. And they're voting, their class interests, not their affiliation with their community, with their religious community or their ties with Israel, or even if they've been affected by anti-Semitism. That is what matters the most to them.
Okay, but that brings to the question of, because, many people say, well, if it had been any other Republican candidate, other than Trump, things would have been different. I've heard this argument a lot, okay, which is Trump is sui generis, and therefore you cannot actually study this phenomenon about Jews or anybody else when Trump is the candidate, because he is crazy and unpredictable and people have an aversion to him, all right? But again, this is just anecdotal, but maybe you've seen examples of this yourself. But before Trump became the nominee, the candidate, I remember having a conversation with a family member about the list of candidates. And I said, okay, but maybe I said, I don't know, DeSantis, he could be good or something. And that person went, in other words, I'm not so sure if a different Republican candidate had been at the top of the ticket, that a lot of Jews would have said, oh, okay, I can vote for him now. It's not Trump. I don't know. You tell me. You're in America. You meet a lot of these people. It's my sense.
Well,
it's my theory.
Trump is sui generis, but the truth is any Republican candidate would have been demonized the way he has been demonized. That's true of DeSantis. I mean, it's especially true of DeSantis. Yes. About, during the period when it appeared that he might be a serious contender for the Republican presidential nomination, a period that I would say was ended by the indictments of Trump, which rallied, most Republicans around him because they thought it was so unfair. DeSantis was being demonized by the left in the same way Trump was, the same way that George W. Bush used to be. That I don't think that argument really holds water. In that, this is about sort of deep partisan ties and a hyperpartisan moment in American history. And I think the Jews and their major groups like the ADL and the American Jewish Committee, they have embraced that kind of partisanship. Whether they purport to care about anti-Semitism or not, they are judging, candidates and parties, in the same, based on where their partisan ties are. And even if they claim to be, fighting for social justice, there's a certain irony here in that they have put themselves not merely on the other side of the political aisle for most working class voters, but they put themselves on the other side of the aisle from the of those voters. And their plight, the issues that they're dealing with, they've exhibited contempt for them. And I think that's as true of, sort of liberal Jewish voters as it is for any other sector in the community. And, as much as, and, you explain it, your father, Norman Podhoretz, wrote, a great book a while back about why Jews are liberal. I think if that book were being written today, he'd have to take more into account, not merely the fact that, liberalism had become the religion of so many American Jews, but the fact that their sort of class interests and their class ties have, sort of calcified their partisan interests, regardless of its impact upon, people who are less fortunate than them.
But when you actually speak to people like that, okay, if you were to go, right, you're going out of the Upper West Side of Manhattan, go schmooze after synagogue, you go walk down Broadway in New York, and you talk to some of those people. If you were to say to them, you vote the way you do because you're members of the elite and you actually don't, that's actually your religion. They would deny it. And if you were to ask them, okay, we know you hate Trump and all that, but how can you do this when there's anti-Semitism and Israel's under attack or whatever? You're going to actually ask them. I'm assuming their answer would be, as you hear regularly, if Trump is elected, they'll take away our abortions, democracy will end, we'll never have an election again. What do they say? Oh, women's rights, minorities' rights, human rights, and reproductive. Oh, yeah, that's what they call it. What? Reproductive health care. They have some kind of euphemism for abortion. And it's all going to go, it'll all disappear. And you say, based on where do you get that? Okay, but never mind. They wouldn't say it's because I'm an elitist and I don't like the working class. They would not say that.
No, they were
sure.
But frankly, it's true. I think that's been made painfully clear, certainly in this last year. And I think the coda to this discussion about American Jews is, right now, we're speaking only 2 days after the vote. And many of them are in shock. But I think, many of these groups, including those who purport to represent American Jewry, and perhaps in some ways actually do, are primed to join a new resistance against Trump. And that's that will be, for me, that will be the thing to watch. How much energy is put into, replicating the sort of post-2016 election effort, which was to delegitimize the man who had just been elected president and his administration, and whether we're going to see a rerun of that. Certainly in Israel, we saw, how that works after Netanyahu won in November 2022, and, another kind of resistance using the issue of judicial reform, but really, not so much it being about constitutional issues in Israel, but about culture war issues, about how you felt about the Orthodox, or how you felt about who should be running the country, regardless of whether, of who wins elections. And, that's something to watch in terms of how American Jews are going to react to their side losing.
Absolutely. The question is, maybe they've run out of steam. I mean, after all, Trump can't run again. This would be his last term. However, we've already seen rumblings, which kind of make you laugh when you think about it, about how he's too old and maybe he's infirm and maybe he's losing it. Was like, oh, really? That's interesting. Where were you guys when Biden was showing signs of dementia way before the debate that caused the Democrats to push him, to force him to resign, all right? Where were they? We didn't notice it? Anybody watching television noticed it. But I'm saying now they're trying to say that about Trump, that he needs to reveal his health records and he's not, and he's too old and all that. So I think that might be part of the next, I would say, pressure campaign.
Yeah, I think that's certainly, something to look for. I don't know that Republicans will be very receptive to that hypocritical reaction, but we'll see. But I think the main thing is that if groups like the Jewish Council on Public Affairs and many of the sort of left-leaning groups that purport to represent Jews sort of align themselves with this resistance and prioritizing it over concerns about anti-Semitism, let alone support for Israel, that will be sort of one more step in terms of their lack of legitimacy. But now I want to turn to the U.S.-Israel relationship post this election. Obviously, as you say, polls show that the vast majority of Israelis, almost to the same extent that American Jews supported, opposed Trump, most Israelis supported him. And I think there is certainly the clear expectation, based on Trump's record, above all, that Trump will be a lot more supportive than Biden and Harris were. But I guess my question to you is not just about the relationship between Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, which got rocky for a while because Netanyahu was forced to actually recognize that Biden had won the 2020 election eventually. But, are Israelis going to be, what are the expectations there, and how can they manage their expectations when, we don't know for sure how things are going to go?
Well, what I've been hearing, and, from the common sense crowd, I'd like to call it, is that, okay, based on past experience, there was no more pro-Israel president in the White House than President Trump. And everybody even agrees with that other than the far left, okay? But every Israeli, Trump performed a set of, he took a set of policies, implemented a set of policies, one after the other, that were beneficial for Israel. And only the far left didn't like those policies. The second thing is that he had an administration that was even more important than who he is. And I think, again, the common sense crowd says, stop with the personality cult, both hating a certain person and loving him. Okay, and that goes for Netanyahu and Trump. This business of Trump, Bibi. No. What are their policies, and who is their cabinet, or in a case, who is the U.S. administration? And Trump surrounded himself. By the time he finally got his whole cabinet assembled, after a few changes, right? He had to, as all presidents do, that happens every time.
The presidents who are basically starting out new in politics and you don't know how Washington works.
Right. So there was some shifts. And finally, when his team was assembled, it was amazing. Okay. And Israelis really thought it was amazing for the Middle East, for Israel, for America, for the world. Smart people. So it didn't even matter if Trump was saying something that sounded funny. You didn't know, is he joking or is he being ridiculous or whatever he was being over the top. But, for example, Mike Pompeo, his Secretary of State, was not being silly. He was very clear. And David Friedman, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, was very clear and very good. Many people in the administration were fantastic. So the hope in Israel is that there will be a repeat, if not of exactly the same people, similar types of good people. And one thing we can all agree on here in Israel, when I say we, I don't mean, necessarily you, is that whoever it is, it's going to be better than the crew in Washington right now, given its credentials, its background, its open belief in deals with Iran, deals with terrorists, appeasement of this, appeasement. This, it's not something that I'm saying, it's not a conspiracy theory about them. It's all out there. So we know that that's not going to be a Trump administration. What we don't know is Trump going to surround himself with the more, how do I put this delicately, Jonathan? I don't know, the more loony aspects of the people who are close to him, such as Tucker Carlson, I don't know, Marjorie Taylor Greene or Laura Loomer, some people who are, you know, a little more fringy. And in the case of Tucker, that's because he's become some kind of open anti-Semite, which is mysterious, but there you are. The others, I don't know. So we don't know, and that will determine a lot. However, even then, one thing we know, we saw the Republican convention. We saw the crowds with Israeli flags, it was whoever, you know, you're talking about a party that has come out so totally in support of Israel that, you know, unconditional support. This is not an administration that will threaten to withhold weapons that Israel needs. It is not an administration. Now, it's possible Trump will say, as Trump does, end all wars. We don't want war. We don't want war. We're going to end this war. But what he hasn't said is ceasefire. There's a big difference because ceasefire really means lose the war. Trump indicates win the war already and get it done with. Okay, there's a big difference in those two narratives. And one thing I believe about him, and I think he's indicated it too, is he's not going to have any American troops on the ground. No, thank you very much. And they don't want it, and the Republicans don't want it. We know that. But Israel isn't demanding that. One thing we believe is that he will not tie Israel's hands. He will not prevent Israel from winning the war. Prevent Israel. If Israel says, we need to go into, the way we said, we need to go into Rafah, we need to go into, you know, into Lebanon, we need, whatever we need to do, we need to attack Iran from the air. I almost can guarantee, just from my own, you know, from what I've been reading, that there's no way he'll say, don't do it. He won't say the Biden famous don't. I think he'll say, what he might say is, don't want to know. Do what you got to do. It's not on us. But he certainly will not withhold aid or weapons. That's what we believe.
I think that's true. And I think you brought up, you know, some basic, you know, fundamental facts about the political divide in the United States that is reflected in policy towards Israel. The two parties have more or less exchanged identities on Israel in the last 60 years. The Democrats used to be much more pro-Israel. Now they are deeply divided with its left wing, its sort of intersectional anti-Israel left wing, and even openly anti-Semitic at times left wing, fighting against a supposedly more centrist, more pro-Israel faction. The Republicans are a lockstep pro-Israel party. It's true. You know, I've written about it a lot. It's worth pondering the influence of Tucker Carlson. He's certainly a member of the Trump inner circle, but I think that's more as a factor of sort of Trump, you know, court jester and court flatterer. Rather, you know, he's never had any policy influence. Certainly he didn't during the Trump first term when, you know, at that time Carlson had the bully pulpit of a Fox News show and was, you know, very much in favor of appeasement of Iran, and Trump was quite the opposite. Also, the current administration is made up of Obama administration alumni and carried on Obama's policies of failed policies of attempting to appease Iran. And that is the opposite of what just about anybody Trump would appoint to positions would be in favor of. Now, you bring up, you know, sort of in passing, one potential point of conflict, which is, as much as he keeps saying Israel should do whatever it needs to do, as J.D. Vance said as well, to win the war, but he certainly wants the war to be finished up soon, the war against Hamas and Hezbollah. He'd like it to be finished before he takes the oath of office in January. That's a pretty tough task for Netanyahu to try to pull off, you know, for his, you know, former and hopefully future friend in the White House, because Hamas has no interest in ending the war or giving up the remaining hostages. Hezbollah has, despite heavy blows, stuck to, firing on Israel because that's what Iran wants. And the truth is, as much as Trump wants, he's certainly in favor. He squeezed Iran, very much while he was president, really achieved a lot with sanctions and with picking off some of Iran's terrorist leaders. But he does not want a war with Iran. The United States, there may be some people in Israel that wants the United States and Israel to openly attack Iran and to, try to topple the regime. That is nothing that Donald Trump will do. And quite frankly, the American people don't want that.
No, right. But there's a question about that. And then I have another question. The question about that is not whether the American people want or Trump wants to deal with Iran, go to war with Iran. But if it becomes necessary, for example, for Israel to engage in more serious combat than we recently did by striking military targets, which were very crucial because what we did was take out air defenses, meaning that we made the next attack, if we're going to attack oil or nuke facilities, made it easier because we took out the missiles that could intercept or shoot down any planes. So the question only is if we needed America to give us the right bunker busters, for example, or sell us, provide us with the kind of weaponry that I don't believe we have, though. Again, what do I know about exactly what stores of weapons we have? So there, I'm not sure that Trump would prevent us if it were something that needed to be done, because he also said we have to prevent Iran from going nuclear. So that's one thing. But then my question is, okay, what about this lame duck period? Because we have this weird problem. When Obama was in his lame duck period, he said, okay, there we go. Now I'm going to screw Israel with everything I've got in my last weeks in office. And he didn't veto a disgusting UN Security Council resolution. He did something, he just sort of stuck it to Israel. And he also hated Netanyahu personally, but he also was very anti-Israel in everything he did. Now, Biden is a trickier thing because, first of all, Biden is an old-style Democrat who he never hated Israel or anything like that. It's just, he always I'm a Zionist.
He wanted Israel to do what he wanted it to do.
Yeah, and that's right. But he did have an antipathy to Netanyahu when Netanyahu got reelected and tried to help oust him and all that stuff. But here's the rub: now Biden must have a lot of Schadenfreude about Kamala's loss because she and the rest of them, they forced him out. He didn't want to. Right. So part of him, the part of his brain, I guess you want to say, that's still functioning, must feel some satisfaction in her humiliating defeat. So now the question is, what does he do with it? Because now Kamala is nobody. While she was running, was like the president, although she isn't. Biden is still the president until January 20th. So what is he going to do? We're wondering, Israelis are wondering, is he going to do what Obama did? Is he going to go after Israel and do something nasty? Or is he going to stick it to the Kamala progressives, the Kamala crowd, and the AOC progressives, and all of those who say Israel's committing genocide, and actually leave Israel alone until January, or do something that gets them annoyed? It's not clear what's going to happen in this next 2.5 months.
Yeah, I think that's an open question. I think there are, it might go either way, but I would suggest that one factor that might sort of cause Israelis to breathe a little easier and friends of Israel to breathe a little easier is the fact that, policy has really been adrift the last few months as far as the president. We're not really sure how active and how involved he is day to day with these decisions. Which isn't to say that he's, completely, incompetent.
Yeah.
He certainly has at times demonstrated a lack of competence and a lack of of ability to exercise his office. But I think for the most part, things have just been drifting. And sort of 2 more months of drift if they leave Israel alone, leave the government of Israel to do what it needs to do to continue to attempt to win the war against Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran, would certainly be welcome. And the fact that Biden doesn't seem to have the energy or sort of the venom to do really much in any direction, not just Israel for foreign policy, would lead me to think that perhaps our fears about another lame duck stab in the back, as Obama did, might be, we might not, we might be, happily surprised that it doesn't happen, but we'll see. One more point about Trump and the coming administration. I think you hit on a very important point. It really matters who the people are. On the one hand, as I said, the Republicans are a pro-Israel party. You really have to search for, anti-Israel people within the leadership of the Republican Party, both in Congress and among those who are more likely to be appointed to posts, by Trump. Most of whom are now, it's going to be kind of an inner circle kind of thing. He's learned to distrust the experts even more and learned to distrust the Washington establishment. There will be no more Rex Tillerson's or James Mattis's named to cabinet posts in the next administration. I'm pretty sure about that, which is good news for Israel. But we also don't know exactly whether they will be as good or as passionate about supporting Israel, passionate about promoting and reviving the Abraham Accords as the crew that was in Washington in 2020 were. These are open questions that can only be answered by time. And I guess, again, that goes back to my question, about, sort of the sentiment, the mood in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv, in the defense ministry is, what are their expectations from a Trump administration? Are they anticipating, are they, champing at the bit, thinking that Trump will have their backs? Or at least that he, as you say, he won't be as bad. No matter what he does, it won't be as bad as what has happened these last 4 years. But we really don't know, do we?
No, we don't know. And it's interesting you mentioned the defense establishment in Israel because Netanyahu just fired our defense minister, Yoav Gallant. And why do I bring it up in this context? It is relevant to this very context. And I think the timing is as well. Because our defense minister was leaning towards the Biden administration inner circle. He was meeting with them. They liked him. He's their guy. Okay. And one thing that we know now is that because he's gone, it's hard to describe it in American terms, okay? Because he's not just some woke leftist, but he is in the old boy network elite. And he has the same mentality, pre-October 7th mentality. Israelis call it the conceptia. He, as our defense minister, several times not only went against the government decisions and voted against them, but he kept wanting a ceasefire and, okay, let's stop already the war and we'll get the hostages. Not exactly the type you want as your defense minister. Okay, maybe you'd want that as some kind of ambassador or foreign minister. Mm-hmm. But the point is, why is it relevant? Because we now need a defense minister. Now, we have a defense minister called Israel Katz. Many people outside of Israel don't know him, even though he's been the foreign minister for a while. Not that long, actually, because he also replaced somebody. He rotated with a different foreign minister. But what's important about that is that he does not have that frame of mind, the pre-October 7th frame of mind. And if he meets with at the moment, it's Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary in America. But the idea is to be more in lockstep with like-minded Washingtonians. And when you have today a defense minister who's more in lockstep with the democratic, American Democrat mind frame, it wasn't good. It wasn't good for us. I mean, I know that a lot of people here were saying, yes, you need to have good relations with Washington, which is true. But it depends what you mean by that. Yes, and now I think we have a good chance of having good relations with Washington, but on the right side.
Yeah. And I think it's also, I think Israelis will be, despite the expectations of American Jews about this, will probably be happier with a quote unquote America first foreign policy agenda from Trump because it's anti-multilateral, it's anti-UN, it's anti the expectations of the international community, which was at the core of both the Obama and the Biden foreign policy approach, which look to the UN, look to international organizations, which hate Israel, which are essentially anti-Semitic. Now, obviously, part of that is, some differences about supporting Ukraine or giving a blank check to Ukraine because Trump wants to settle that war. And I think he's right to want to settle it rather than to be locked into an endless war that neither side can win. But I think Israel will be better off with an America that is more realistic about its foreign policy obligations and willing to back the allies that back it rather than to be locked into something, as much as, I'm not advocating for the United States withdrawing from NATO, but that was a very one-sided relationship for the United States. I mean, the Europeans did all the taking, the United States did all the giving. That's not what Trump wants, and he's right not to want that. He's right to want to not be obligated to fund for the defense of a group of countries that can pay for their own defense. Israel, will, I think, fit quite nicely into an, as much as the phrase America First has unfortunate historic associations for those of us who remember, pre-World War II isolationists. In this context, it is not isolationist, but it is realistic foreign policy. And I think that's to Israel's benefit, despite, I think what a lot of American Jews and indeed some, conservatives even think about what American foreign policy should be.
I totally agree. I think there's a misconception about the new meaning of America First. And I think that Israelis who get it, what they see it as, yes, the world needs a strong America. And America can't be strong if it's so full of it's all globalist and everything. And no country is better than any other country, a la Obama. No, that's not true. You've got to be the greatest country and the strongest country. And the other thing is, I think we are sick and tired. I mean, Israelis understand that term, the international community, think of those connotations. The international community will be angry at Israel if Israel does this, Israel does that, Israel. What international community are we talking about? The UN, the International Criminal Court at The Hague, the International Court of Justice. So I think that here what you're saying is, no. Okay, no. There's not an international community. There's a great superpower, and it's better than the others, and it has the values that we should be emulating. I think Israel wants that. Israel has never expected America to, okay, you come and you save us. No, the left in Israel says, Biden, please come and save us from ourselves. No, the right wing here does not say, Trump, come and save us from ourselves. No way. No.
Yeah, I think Israel will be better off with an American president and a foreign policy team in Washington that doesn't give a damn about the international community.
Exactly.
That goes against the grain for a lot of American Jews and even some, people who used to be in the Bush administration, former Republican office holders. But I think it's for the best for Israel. Well, Ruthie, the hour has flown by, as it always does when we speak. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us on Think Twice. Everyone should follow Ruthie Blum, her columns at jns.org, as well as her podcast, Israel Undiplomatic. And we also want to thank our audience. Please remember to tune in every day for Jonathan Tobin Daily Edition. And whether you're listening to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any of the other podcast platforms, or watching us live on Facebook or X or on the JNS YouTube channel, please like and or subscribe to JNS. Click on the bell for notifications and give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. Next week we'll be off, but we'll be back in 2 weeks. And remember, until then, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you again soon.